And again, like the video, I think you got to watch it more than once and then see how each slide kind of comments on the other slide. And then I think we also have to have a dialogue, a debate. You know, I've had hour-long debates and still haven't sorted through everything. So, you know, a 15-minute video is not going to cover everything.
I don't really need 15 minutes to explain to you that your argument is full of logical fallacies. It's broken. Fix it. That's it. Here's an example. Necessary versus contingent. The word necessary, you're saying, is a thing that has to exist without a cause, and that contingent can only exist due to chance or a cause. Well, what example of anything do we have that is necessary? You only give one, so we can replace necessary. And contingent is a false dichotomy, because we're leaving out chance and a filtering mechanism. So this is what is really going on. It's God versus contingent. God's the only thing that has to exist without a cause, and then contingent is things that can only exist due to cause or due to chance or chance plus a filtering mechanism. But we're going to leave out the filtering mechanism because chance is something that people understand to be, it's just completely arbitrary. You roll the dice, you have no idea what's going to happen, it's completely chance. Although whether or not chance is real or not is another discussion altogether. But this is really what the argument is. I know it's like, well, but it's about this. No, this is really what the argument boils down to. That there is something that exists without any cause, even though we've never seen anything like it, and that's the thing that you're calling God. So just say that's what it is. Let's not mince words here. As far as something that exists because of a cause, again, the vagueness of cause and effect is something that I think is a potential problem, but nonetheless, we know that cause and effects works on many things, but we cannot say that it works on everything. It's not a universal statement. There are potential counterexamples to it. And even if we say, fine, okay, cause is universal, you still have the problem of the false dichotomy. You're leaving out the filtering mechanism that is usually present when talking about chance. And that might be why chance isn't really even a thing, is because there's always a filtering mechanism. In the case of the universe, it might be something like gravity. In the case of life, it might be death.
But then he also said, when I was going through, so I asked the question, why are causal relations so consistent? And my argument is, if the consistent causal framework could be broken, then what ensures that causal relations maintain at all? And I go through what I see are the logically exhausted options. So could the consistent causal framework be caused to be consistent? Well, no, that would be question begging, because why is that cause of the consistency of it consistent?
The listing of plausible options and then eliminating of those options to get to a conclusion is a rhetoric that apologists often use. It is not proper logic. Here's an example of why. My door is open. Either it's a ghost, or it was the wind, or I opened it. Those are the three explanations. Those are the only explanations. Well, no, there's other explanations. No. Those are the only explanations. Aren't there others? Yeah, no, those are it. It's those three. And then I say, well, it can't be that I opened it because I didn't open it. It can't be the wind because it was securely latched. Therefore, it must have been the ghost that opened the door. That's not how logic should function. That's not how you get to an answer. You cannot hope to create a list of all plausible answers and then strike down each one until only one remains. The problem is you have no evidence that a ghost is even a thing in the first place that can open a door. So you would have to prove that there's a ghost before you could even say that it was one of those possible things. And that would require its own argumentation. In fact, it wouldn't even need argumentation. All you would have to do is provide evidence of that ghost. But see, a ghost is not something that you have evidence for because there isn't any visible way to see a ghost. It's just not that kind of thing. So asking for evidence is a category mistake. Ghosts are not visible. They're not measurable by the realm of science. This is what a ghost looks like. Yeah. It doesn't look like anything because you can't see it. You can't test it. You can't measure it. You can't sense it. You can't do anything on it other than give some bad argument for it. The ghost is a concept that only exists in the mind. It is not something that can be argued for logically because it doesn't exist. But let's say that you believe in ghosts, so you want to make an argument for it anyways. So what you do is you set up a scenario where you say, well, what causes this door to open? And then you present ghosts as an option, eliminating all the other options, and then declaring that you have your proof that a ghost exists. It doesn't work that way.
Could it be the nature of things? See, and this is where he pushed back the most. He said, well, it could be the nature of things for things to be consistent. And I argued that was question begging. The reason why it's question begging is because if it is the nature of things, then it's necessary. And if that's the case, then you're acknowledging that there's necessity. That's fine. We can move on.
Why is this background blue? Well, because it's not some other color. But why is it blue? Why did we call this background color blue? Now, that's the name we gave it. But why is it blue? Just, it is blue. That's it. It's the nature of blue to be blue. That's the tautology. Many tautologies exist, and they are not question begging. You need to understand logic a lot deeper than you do now. And it's easy to understand some fallacies, but the mechanics of logic is a little bit harder. And I think, honestly, you're missing the fundamentals of logic.
But if you're going to say the natures are contingent, but yet they also maintain consistency, and it's their nature that makes them maintain consistency, that's a type of causality. Now we have the nature of things causing the things themselves to be consistent. But why is there that contingent causality? It would seem like that needs a cause, and now we're back to the beginning of the question, or it's just, next option, chance. But if it's just chance, there are trillions of times it could fail, but it doesn't, these causal relations. So chance isn't plausible. So a necessarily consistent causal framework is the most plausible option. So to say, well, maybe it is the nature of things. And it sounded like he said that it could be a tautology, which to me, if I'm understanding him correctly, it's logically necessary that things are consistent. I find that really implausible because we can imagine universes where things don't behave that way.
It's irrelevant whether or not we can imagine or not imagine any given universe, or whether or not we can't believe or can't understand a particular idea as being the true idea. As far as it potentially being the nature of things, here's an explanation of a battery.
Now imagine we have put two different conductors called electrodes in a conductive liquid like salt water called electrolyte that has positive and negative ions. The electrodes are eyeballing their beloved charges, not doing anything but just watching. This tension between material creates a potential for energy between terminals. Then suddenly you close the circuit. The negative electrode says, "Damn you, negative mama, I need you closer to feel your juicy electron." The negative ion can now come close to the electrode and repel the electron in the electrode and release its electron into it and become neutral. Ah, yes. Dang, babe, since when you became so neutral? I think we should see other atoms. The neutral atoms form their own molecules and leave the scene. But that repelled electron is in the other electrode now, which attracts the positive ions. Oi, anyone wants an extra electron? Me. Boop. and the positive ion becomes neutral and goes away too. And this cycle continues until all ions in the electrolyte disappear.
That clip is from YouTuber ElectroBoom. His channel link will be in the description. Now, why show you that? Well, because it's interesting, and now maybe you have somebody new to subscribe to. But other than that, it's somewhat of an analogy of what I'm trying to go for here. The nature of the electrode is to just go from one metal to the other because there's this, particular liquid, and this is just what happens. It's just how it works. There isn't any further why or how necessarily to it. It is simply the nature of the battery to do this particular thing. And maybe the universe is kind of like that. After all, the universe is running down a bit far slower than a battery would. Even the best batteries eventually run out, and that's because they've achieved 100% entropy. And at that point, that's it. It's a dead battery, or in the universe's case, it will be a dead universe. So, what's keeping it going until it dies? Well, the nature of it is keeping it going until it dies. The energy is in this process until entropy occurs. And the same can be said of every single thing that we observe. Certainly the human body itself is an example of something that is in constant entropy. Now, everything is fighting against that to keep it surviving for as long as possible. And that process is simply part of the reality that we observe. What's keeping it going? There's a lot of things that are keeping the body going. There's a lot of natural mechanisms. But at no point do we need a ultimate explanation of why those mechanisms are keeping things going. The heart doesn't know that it's pumping blood for a body. The cells of the heart have no idea why or what they are doing. They're just doing this thing. And that's what they're supposed to do. That's what they've evolved to do. That's what they are for. There isn't any deeper explanation. Now, that might be very frightening in a sense to consider the implication that the universe doesn't have some sort of grand narrative or reason for being, or what's keeping it going might be that's just what it does. It is going until it stops. That's just what it does. Because that sort of answer smacks us in the emotional areas where we say, well, what's the point? Why? I mean, everything's going to fade out and expire, and then what? Then that's it? What sense does that make? Or what was the, what's the purpose? Why? There might not be an answer. Or it might be that we haven't found the answer. But for the theist, for the person that thinks that there's a God, the answer is always going to be God, or they're not a theist anymore. So the answer must be decided beforehand. The answer must be God, and the arguments must be constructed to lead to God. They're not a deductive argument. They're not formulated to be that, although they look like it. And, of course, deductive reasoning employed isn't necessarily the best way to go, and a deductive argument would be fine if it was valid and sound. But it's neither here. The structure is incorrect. The whole argument is not a typical syllogism. And then there are multiple logical fallacies, of which I only pointed out one. But I only need one. And the fact that my otherwise worthy opponent here can't even accept that there's one fallacy says a lot to me. Now, I've spoken to Dry, and he's a good guy, and he's got a good head on his shoulders, but he does admit that logic is a little bit difficult for him. And so that might be what's causing the problem here. The underlying mechanics of logic are simple to me, but not so for him. And there's probably something that he understands that I go, what? To. We all have our different fields that we're really good at, and of course there will be somebody probably better than us. Unless you're at the top, then that's pretty cool. But then you're like, I know that I don't know that much at that point. Anyway, so we don't have a good logical argument at all. We don't have any sort of empirical evidence. We don't have any sort of repeatable test that we can do. We have a question that begs an answer. What is keeping this going? That assumes there is a what. And it's like, well, it can't be this. Why not? Well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter. Well, but then if it was just this, then it would fall apart. Not necessarily. The battery works quite well, and we don't object to any part of that. But we don't live inside of the battery, unless the universe is basically a giant battery, just a different sort of battery. But that would, again, lead us to potential existential crisis, and that might cause cognitive dissonance, and that might cause us to retreat to our beliefs rather than whatever the facts are. And here we don't know what the facts are, and so that might scare us. The unknown, for many, is quite frightening. I love it, though. I love the mystery. I enjoy it. I want to understand more about it, and I want to do everything I can to figure it out. And so I've used and continue to use the simple system. Do we have empirical evidence? No, we don't here. Do we have any repeatable test? Nope. And is this argument valid or sound? No, it's neither. And therefore, we should be skeptical of its conclusions.